With this feeling I can leave. I'm working and I'm dreaming. Will you dare to give it all up and walk by my side? Do you see the road? Do you hear its call? Do you want a part of it?
Good morning, everybody. It is Friday, the 17th of June, and I am your host, Jason Bainbridge, and today we are broadcasting a new energy report with Daniel Ruick and Levi Wolf. Good morning, fellas.
Morning, Jason.
Yeah, good morning, Jason.
How are you all today? Doing well, I hope.
Yeah, ticking along.
Ticking along. Actually, as a slightly off topic, earlier on this morning, when we were preparing for today's broadcast, Daniel, you mentioned the planetary alignment which started today.
Yeah, we were just talking about some planetary alignments. Actually, it was Levi that mentioned it. But,
Actually, it was Levi that mentioned it, wasn't it? That's right. Levi. What know you of this planetary alignment today?
I don't really know anything about it, mate. All I know is that we've got 5 planets lining up, and then starting today, and then on the 23rd to the 25th, the Earth comes into the alignment. So that'll create a 6 planetary alignment, including the Earth.
Wow. Isn't that kind of like rather special, don't you think?
Well, I've never heard of it happening in my lifetime.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. Me too. I've never heard of it happening in my lifetime either. Find out where I am, here I am. Okay. So here you have it. So we're broadcasting on the day of a 6th planetary alignment beginning. So I'm pretty sure the WEF and their alternative spiritualists will be out there stirring their cauldrons and casting their spells. I'm sure they'll be having a great time with it today. Keep your eye out on special events happening around the world today as this planetary alignment kicks off. So let's get into today's subject. And there's an article here. Let me just transition that over. There's an article here. Oop. That didn't transition over at all. Here we are. There's an article here. Call for government to subsidize sustainable aviation fuel. Now, this is a little bit older, this article. This is actually, oh no, it's not an older article. The previous article I was looking at, this is a relevant, recent article. So it starts off, a Trans-Tasman Alliance is calling on the government to partner with the private sector to accelerate the use of biofuels by the aviation sector. So this leads us to wonder whether or not they have plans for Marsden Point in this move to accelerate the use of biofuels in the aviation sector. Well, what do you know about this, Mr. Levi?
Well, all I know is that in 2018, there is a company there is an organisation called Scion, and they are a Crown Research Institute. So they're a Crown government organisation who in 2018 identified as a target in Scion's NZ Biofuels roadmap. Now, when we follow that paper trail, it comes all the way through to the 2021, where Air New Zealand teamed up with Skyon, Z Energy, and a crowd called LanzaJet, and they produced a document. If we can give me a second, I'll pull this document up. They produced a document in 2021 detailing plans on how they are going to refine sustainable aviation fuel in New Zealand. So we've got some major players involved in this. And the MBIE is noted to have been on board with them. Give me 1 second here.
It's interesting.
This is the Air New Zealand Sustainable Aviation Fuel, and in an appendix to this document, this is a PDF which is available online. All you need to do is search Sustainable Aviation Fuel NZ and look for the Air New Zealand download. So they are calling it a consortium. So there's an Appendix 1, there's a SAF Consortium 2050 roadmap in which they detail out a detailed plan where they will go from 2.5% production by 2025 to 50% production of sustainable aviation fuel in New Zealand by 2050. So there seems to be plans afoot. The government has not released any details or has put their hand up to being involved in this, but we can see through the involvement of Skyon, which is a Crown Research Institute, and the involvement of the MBIE in this, and already we've got these big players here in New Zealand, Z Fuel and LanzaJet, which have put a considerable amount of time and effort into this, that I would be very surprised if there wasn't something solid underneath all of this information that I believe there are plans afoot. And what that has to do with the refinery, I'm not 100% sure. But there was, yesterday I think it was, there was a little bit of disturbance and people started panicking about movement inside the refinery, and that has actually been identified as them playing around with the avgas or the jet fuel section of the refinery. So there's movement in the refinery around that particular part of the plant as well.
Okay, well, there's a quotation here from that RNZ story, is that we need to have involvement from the government on this. That needs to be bridged. We need to work collectively, and that the report suggests that government should consider co-financing biofuel production plants and other possible incentives to accelerate the uptake of the SAFs by the airlines. Now, isn't that why we have a refinery? To fulfill this need? Called Marsden Point?
Yeah, well, but my issue with this is that biofuels, regardless of the source, are far more costly in terms of the energy input than you get energy output. So you have a less than one energy input to energy output ratio. So for every 1 unit of energy that you get out, you're putting in 10 to 100 times that the amount of energy in, which makes it fundamentally unsustainable. Whereas with oil, we're somewhere between it used to be 100 units of oil out for every for every unit of oil worth of energy being put in, or so your input ratio to your output ratio made oil sort of the cheapest energy source on the planet, and currently it still is. It's not as efficient. We're somewhere between 20 and 30 units of energy out for every unit of energy in. Today, it's said to be decreasing, but I think that really is very much dependent on whether the investment is continuing to be put into finding new, putting in new wells, maintaining, and maintaining sort of our ability to actually extract the oil from the earth, economically, through finding the best places to harvest from, and also spreading the load. It takes time for the oil to accumulate, through abiotic processes. So if we don't suck all the oil out of the earth in one particular location, and we actually spread that around a bit, then we potentially better off. And again, New Zealand is sitting on massive resources in that respect. Taking, and I believe that the sustainable aviation fuels is likely to be produced predominantly from wood biomass from our forestry, and that is a inherently expensive process. One, it's expensive to actually collect the wood waste in the first place. And then you've got to process it into some form of fuel, which then can be fed into our refinery. And the other question is, of course, without the refinery already operating, feeding any bio harvested crude source into the refinery is going to be an exceedingly difficult prospect. And I think that it's foolishness. It's trying to invent invent the solution before the problem exists. We currently don't have a worldwide oil shortage, which forces us to have to do these things. Yes, we should be looking for better ways to do stuff. We should be looking at, can we take some of these waste streams and use them to supplement the thing, and at the same time actually deal with the waste. And I think in that respect, our first protocol should be going and harvesting all the waste plastics and organic matter out of our landfills. Using waste to energy plants. And waste plastics to crude plants, which the infrastructure is available. You can. It's not that difficult to do. It's not a particularly difficult process. But sort of this sustainable aviation fuel gig, I think, is just a bit of a rorp.
Can I just add to that? So if you look on the Skion or Skion website, whatever they call themselves, this Crown Research Institute, their mission statement on their About Us page is actually, or our vision, so their vision statement is prosperity from trees. So the whole institute seems to be set up around trees, and what can we do with trees? We can make fuel out of trees, we can make plastic out of trees. So the entire institute exists solely for the purpose of replacing oil with trees. That's what I can see from looking at that. So that brings into light, this Jacinda's election promise. Remember way back when they first came in and they said they were going to plant 1 billion trees everywhere, and they were going to get everybody off the dole, and everyone was going to frolic through nature planting trees.
Yes.
So this
Tree huggers.
Yeah, it appears to me that there is intent and purpose right from way back, from years back, to pull off this, replacing oil with these tree products. Now, with oil exploration and things like that, when wells run dry, it's a well-known tactic for the oil companies to bump the price of gas in order for them to be able to fund the exploration and the drilling of new wells. So with something like this, obviously, as Daniel rightly points out, this is an expensive undertaking. It costs more energy input than output. So, $5 a litre to get this thing off the ground is probably, not an unreasonable suspicion for a target price on a litre of 91. I can see it going to $5 a litre at the current cost of barrel to cost of litre ratio. I mean, if we do hit that $180, $200 a barrel, we'll be up to $5 a litre.
Right. There's a further quotation. If we wish to go and reduce New Zealand's emissions faster than we currently are, then there are avenues like this that are available, can be done. But they need us as a community to say, yes, we're prepared to pay the cost. It's kind of, to me, it's kind of like a little kid building a sandcastle and then spending all that time and effort building up the sandcastle, making it look nice and pretty, and then finally just getting bored with it and then coming along and then just destroying it. Pay the cost. The cost of biofuels is more carbon output.
Yeah, it's got to be. It's the question that I have is how do they actually get the offsets? If they're cutting down the trees to turn them into sustainable aviation fuel, then what happens to the carbon credits that sort of were allocated to those trees? That had been sold. Do they suddenly have to be bought back, at a significant margin and then used to along with all the other energy that's being put in, to claim that to deal with that sort of it doesn't make sense. There is no carbon offsetting. There is no reduction in carbon because you're taking a carbon product and you're converting it into another carbon product, very, very inefficiently, far less efficiently than, with probably, I believe, somewhere between 10 to 1, energy input to energy output, through to maybe 100 to 1 energy input to energy output. And, it just doesn't stack up. The numbers don't stack up. Considering that at the moment, we're getting, a 1 to 20 ratio or 1 to 30 ratio. It's between 1 to 20 and 1 to 30 at the moment. Energy input to extract oil, to energy output. So we're getting 20 units of energy, 20 to 30 units of energy out for every unit of energy in extracting oil out of the Earth's crust. And this is abiotic. This is regenerative. We may not fully understand the mechanisms, but I suspect that it'll actually a far more vast resource than has been given credit for. And again, I think that we should be doing more to make sure that what we're doing with that oil, we try and get more efficient combustion processes. And there is technology there. There has been technology around for 50 years that has allowed us to significantly improve the energy efficiency of our vehicles. But most of that technology has been suppressed.
And more than likely, the carbon actually falls to ground and soaks back through to the ground and turns into oil anyway, because carbon's a heavy, very, very heavy substance, and it will eventually fall to ground. But their version of society being willing to pay the prices, racking us all over a barrel, and screwing as much money as they can out of us for energy and transport.
Actually, what I find really bizarre is, if you were going to do it, pine trees is the least efficient and one of the slower ways to do it. If you were going to do sustainable aviation fuels from biomass, then you would be far better off by actually doing it with something that produces a much higher direct vegetable oil. By growing something like
Hemp.
Hemp
Seed oil.
Hemp seed oil, and then you can harvest the fibre and use the fibre for clothing and a product that is similar to fiberglass. That can be used in mixed with concrete to make more sustainable buildings. Actually mixed with clay to make even more sustainable buildings, mixed with resins made from the hemp oil to make a very, very sustainable fibre product for manufacturing cars out of.
Not to mention the fact that pine trees are an ecological disaster in this country. They're an absolute blight on the soil. They're a blight on the native fauna. The acidity of the runoff that goes into the streams, it kills everything. If there wasn't money involved in these pine trees, then every greenie in the nation would be out protesting the planting and the equipment, because they're absolutely destructive and invasive trees that shouldn't be growing in a lot of the places where they are growing. I was driving through back in Narrawahi a couple of days ago, and there was a hillside where the pine had been quite evidently chopped down. It looked to me like years ago, because the logs that they had left behind were quite rotten, and that hillside was still brown. It looked like it had just been burnt yesterday, and I'd say that those pine trees hadn't been there for years by the look of things. So it's an environmentally friendly plant or tree for this country.
So they are the assassin pine trees, then, the slow, quiet assassins of the natural environment where they put up. But New Zealand makes a lot of money in the pine tree industry, don't they?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, most of our raw logs are harvested. They're not processed here. They're put onto ships and sent to either Japan or China. At one stage, overseas they were taking New Zealand logs and they were just basically sinking them in the sea for long-term storage. Until such time as they could bring them back, pull them back out of the sea and then process them and then sell the timber back for a massive premium, because timber is becoming a scarce resource. Particularly doubly so when you consider that they're wanting to turn around and instead of make houses and furniture from it, that they want to go and instead turn it into, use it as biomass for feeding a sustainable aviation fuel. It doesn't sound very sustainable to me.
No, it's ironic, isn't it?
Is the very antithesis of sustainable. They think that because, it takes 25 to 50 years to grow a decent sized pine tree, that somehow makes it more sustainable than oil, where we're not having to expend huge amounts of the energy that is being harvested and actually getting a little bit of fuel out.
It's a total pipe dream, dreamed up by probably, in my estimation, people that probably should lay off smoking if it is just smoking.
Maybe they've been testing out that new bio hemp.
Yeah, possibly.
There's a potentiality for it. So, what do you think? How does Marsden Point come into this? Do you think that there's a possibility that Marsden Point will be used in this process of creating this biofuel?
Almost certainly. I think that it's a foregone conclusion that when they shut down Marsden Point, that they weren't actually out to get rid of it. They were out to sort of repurpose it, for sustainable fuels, for their continuation of eco-terrorism, changing the ecology, of our lands by cutting down on the native forests and then turning them into planting pine instead. At a time when we should be allowing more of our land to return to native thing, and then focusing on high value product like like hemp, which are much more sustainable, have a much shorter time from the initial investment, through to harvesting, and they do far better for the soil. Pine forests, sort of here in New Zealand are, of course they are good and useful in some areas, particularly up in the higher altitude volcanic plains, like up Kaimanawas and Desert Road, around that area, where the land was near to useless simply because of the status of them, because of the volcanic activity that had been there in the past, and the high acidity ground, and ground that was not very productive. Sure, grow what you can grow there. But sort of to be doing what they're doing, taking good pasture land, and which actually captures far more carbon dioxide anyway than pine trees, on a per hectare basis. Then the pasture land, keep the pasture land, and continue with our major export, which is producing food.
And kiwi fruit.
So all I'm saying here is just keep an eye on what's happening there. There's been a lot of rumours that they're pulling the plant apart and they're going to sell it overseas, left, right, and centre. I'm not thoroughly convinced that that those rumours are true. Whether or not they will be doing this sustainable biofuel drive at the Marsden plant site or not, I don't know. They may have another site envisioned for it, but it seems a bit silly considering that this place is already set up and established. To set up and establish a new site in today's climate, especially with all the groups that you need to consider, that that would be a huge undertaking.
Actually, one of the things to note is that there was actually, they had a experimental biomass to fuel, to aviation fuel plant already set up in Wiri, which they shut down because it wasn't sustainable.
Yeah, I've been inside that plant a number of times when it was operating. That was more sort of around the waste oil and fats and things like that, conversion into biodiesel. I think that this sustainable aviation fuel is a different animal, and we've already got an established jet fuel plant at Marsden, so it does tend to make more sense that they would probably look at Marsden first and foremost as the likely candidate carry out this. But in saying that, we don't know. That's all speculation. At this stage, it's all speculation. But we can say with certainty that this sustainable aviation fuel drive has been in existence from at least 2018, according to the documents on the Sion website, the Sion or Steon or whatever they call themselves. Tree huggers.
I think that we can actually find the root of this sustainable fuels thing, not in any science magazines, but in the policy documents coming out of Davos and the World Economic Forum and Bilderberg Group, and ending up sort of being consolidated into what is classically regarded as the Sustainable Development Goals of Agenda 2030.
Right. Speaking of sustaining development goals, here we have, transition to me so I can get over there. Here we have I've highlighted this. The government announced the introduction of a biofuels mandate last year. So this is 2021. It meant that from 2023, fuel wholesalers would have to cut their total greenhouse gas emissions by selling biofuels by 1% in 2023, and then it will increase to 2.4% in 2024 and 3.5% in 2025. So it sounds like the government has to, the producers, right? Wholesalers would have to cut their total greenhouse emissions by selling biofuels. So these wholesalers are energy manufacturers. Who would these wholesalers be? Fuel wholesalers.
Well,
what corporations would they be? I mean,
you'd be talking the likes of Mobil, Exxon, and BP, and all of the fuel suppliers.
Z
Energy. So everything at the pump would have to have 10% ethanol or methanol in it.
which reduces the economy of your vehicles.
Yeah.
It's an absurdity.
But once again, it just paves the way towards their sustainable aviation. It's just more legislative instrumentation, and it's going to up the cost. They know it's going to up the cost. They don't care that it's going up the cost.
Yeah.
And that's just the bottom line, is they're saying that, thou shalt do this because based on this shonky, quackery science that we've got, that thou shalt not question because the science has been settled, and to question it is heresy. Thou shalt do this, and this is going to be good for you, and you must take it, and that's the end of it.
It sounds a lot like trust the science.
We've been dictated to by people who are essentially operating on it as priesthood in some kind of weird religion. This is not based on science. The science. If it was science, then we would be able to question it, and the people who did question it wouldn't get shut down, have their tenures cancelled, and never be hired again. This is as Daniel put it, it's eco-terrorism. We're being terrorised by tyrants.
One of the interesting things about this whole conversation is that every time there is demands that the government pay to do the research, to make the technology work, to subsidise, it's like, well, where are those subsidies coming from? It comes out of our pockets. Those that are earning, and it's like, well, we will replace a good fuel source, which is relatively cheap. It is relatively energy efficient in terms of being able to harvest and refine it into a product which works well in our current technology vehicles. and replace it with something that is very expensive to produce, it's and it's it would never take off on its own, and I'm a great believer in free market economics, and the fact that if something is going to be revolutionary and changing, yes, people will invest in it and they will pay more up front, to fund that research, but it will never take off in the free market, because it's not sustainable, because it doesn't actually produce the goods, it doesn't actually produce what we need. And I think that there is a big thing, and this is the same thing with the whole EV thing. We're having huge subsidies towards both the development and manufacture of better batteries for EVs, so that they can compete with petrol and diesel-driven vehicles. They've been on this that particular gambit for the last 10 to 15 years. In all seriousness, and have they gotten even close? Not really. Not when you consider the energy and that goes into producing the things. The fact that sort of nearly a third of the value of the vehicle is actually in the batteries to drive it. And that's not that the batteries are going to run the car for its entire lifetime in and of themselves. It's that you still have to plug it into the wall. You still have to put the energy in. On top of the cost of actually manufacturing the vehicle, you have to put the energy in order to charge the things up. And that itself has consequences on, the electricity, that we're using sort of is also the same electricity that we're struggling to maintain, sufficient supply of, in order to keep us cool in summer and warm in winter.
Just finishing up on that, just topping up on that, there's another line from the story. It warned fuel prices, and this is going into the area where you're heading with this, it warned fuel prices could increase due to the high cost of importing biofuels for retailers, which could reduce the purchasing power of households. So it would increase due to high cost of importation. Is that what excited them about into getting into their own production? Levi.
Yeah, I think in that respect, it's like everything else. Our refinery actually was being run on a model where the oil companies were taking both as shareholders, as well as getting a kickback, on the controlled refining margins. So I believe that the oil companies were taking a 30% cut shared between them, on top of what they were getting as a shareholder. So the other shareholders were actually being stiffed by the oil companies that were doing a double take. So our refining company was saying, well, we can't make money because the margins which we can't control are too low. Which is why I say sort of get rid of the margin agreement and say, okay, this is what it costs to put per litre to put fuel through our plant, where we can make a return on investment for the shareholders of X amount. Sort of a reasonable return on investment. And whatever the crude costs, becomes the fundamental driver for the price. And we look for the best markets to get our crude from, to produce our fuel from. And particularly looking at our close markets where we're not having to sort of add huge amounts of cost for the transportation of crude from the other side of the world. It kind of makes sense to me.
Right, yeah, it does. It sounds like this entire thing just sounds like a fantasy story, They're creating fictitious science out of nothing and pushing it on the masses using legacy media. So there is a document that Levi shared with us last night, and I'm just going to pop that up onto the screen. I'm just going to pop that up onto the screen. Just give me a second. By the way, our husky in the background is having a bit of a howling session at the neighboring dog. So that's the beautiful thing about not having a studio or a soundproof room. Here we have it. Here we are. Transition that over. All right. So this document, I believe, is a little bit older. And this came out on 2nd of December 2020. So this is a couple of years ago. And surprisingly, for a government document, it's riddled with typos. If you sit down and have a look at that, and we'll post the links to these articles at the bottom of the video when you watch it, and then you can take a look at these articles once you've finished watching the interviews with Daniel and Levi today. But it's kind of interesting here that the proposal is this paper considers the first 3 emissions budgets recommended, typo, by the Climate Change Commission, the Commission, under the CMI Change Response Act 2002, the CCRA, for the periods of the 2022 to 2025, and I'm assuming that's 2026 to 2030, and 2031 to 2035, and seeks the agreement in principle. So, so they've planned this since 2002. This has been going on for quite some time. So this doesn't only involve the Ardern government, does it?
No.
No. No, like I say, Agenda 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. It has its roots in Agenda 21, which was a product of the United Nations, the World Economic Forum, and the Bilderberg Group and Council of Foreign Relations. Where they're wanting to execute a plan that says, well, we simply can't sustain this many people on the planet, so we're going to have to find ways to make their lives so miserable that they won't mind being knocked off, aka population control. And I suspect that the population control is largely rooted in the concern that when there's too many of the normal class of people, that they might get unhappy with the handful of elite at the top that hold sort of 90% of the world's wealth, and get together and do something about it, and recapture some of that wealth.
It seems, I find it oddly curious, to be honest. I find it oddly curious that in the middle of a pandemic, a so-called pandemic, that the government would actually decide to declare a climate change disaster. It just seems a bit too bizarre. It seems such a bizarre thing to do.
Well, the thing about this philosophy is that it's the green agenda, and it's hiding something else. There's another agenda behind it. I mean, look at Hitler as a classic example, right? Hitler didn't come along and say, "Hey, I'm going to be tyrant. Vote me in because I'm going to kill a whole lot of people, and I want to get them out of your way." He got voted in because he said, "Oh, hey, look, I got a way to make jobs and make trains run on time." These guys are ushering in their global tyrannical dictatorship through, oh, look, there's a big emergency, and it's one emergency after the other with these guys, like, look at this pandemic that just swept through the country and killed hundreds of thousands of people. Right, I said that last week or something, didn't I? It's the same thing, the sky's falling and everybody believes them because they're just constantly brainwashed by the media, which is just constantly putting into their head and subliminally, like, telling them that this is happening. They go to school and the teachers are teaching it from the curriculum. This is happening. So people get into a state where they're no longer able to actually, like, think for themselves. Whether you want to call it mass formation, mass psychosis, whether you want to call it, brainwashing. And they just go along with the flow because it's a path of least resistance. Oh, okay, carbon's bad, it's bad for us. But in the meantime, these guys are using this in order to further another agenda. This agenda that they're pushing has absolutely nothing to do with saving the planet from carbon. It has to do with saving their planet that they want to own from you, who are nothing but a useless eater.
That's right. So I've got their emissions reduction required to meet the Commission's proposed budgets against the government baseline projections. So the first budget period is 22 to 2025, which is what we're in. And they want to reduce the metric CO2, right? Energy by 4.2%.
So that's megatons, I believe. So that's million tons. Yeah. So that's 4 million tons. So they're setting goals of carbon reduction, and put them into what they call carbon budgets, I think it is. So they've got these budget periods.
That's right.
So they have to meet these goals of reduction. So, when it comes to closing down Marsden Point Refinery, well, that was very convenient for them because that was going to chop nearly 1 megaton or 0.75, 750,000 tons of carbon.
Out of their budget.
So it's going to take it out of their budget, right? So that wasn't very hard for these ministers that are geared up this way to make that decision and just to put it on the chopping block and chop it, and to hell with the consequences.
That all that does is shift the use of that carbon from the release of that carbon from New Zealand to being released probably
Singapore.
To Singapore, Malaysia, wherever our fuel happens to be coming from at the moment. We're almost certainly, instead of it being sort of 0.75 or 1 megaton, it's going to probably be 2 or 3 megatons for the same amount of fuel. Especially considering the shipping, that's going to be, and that is being induced as a consequence of offshoring. So it's like, well, we're not actually reducing our carbon footprint, we're increasing it. When you consider the global picture, we're just shifting out, so it doesn't appear that it's New Zealand that's the problem.
And this is how we know, and this is how we can quite clearly put our hands on our hearts and say that this is not about saving the environment. This is not about carbon reduction. The agenda here is something else. And we as New Zealanders need to start to talk to our neighbours about this, those of us that are woken up, and say, look, just, think logically. Why would we push our refining offshore when it's not going to stop the actual carbon production? Because we're not going to use any less fuel, we're just going to end up paying more for it, and we're going to end up creating more CO2. You do not have to be Einstein to work that out. You can give that problem to a 7 or 8-year-old in primary school, and they could probably do the math on it, and they could probably tell you quite quickly that you're not doing anything for the environment. And you can't tell me that these ministers in Parliament are that stupid. It cannot simply be that stupid. I mean, they just simply cannot. I mean, nobody is that stupid, right? Especially when you know that you're going to push the price of fuel up $3, $4, $5 a litre. You know that's going to be a consequence of your actions. And why would you do it if you're not going to save on any carbon thing? Okay, they'll say, oh, well, by 2030, we're going to have all these petrol cars off the road and we're going to have this, that, and the other. But that's just not realistic. You do not take away a problem until you have a solution for it. You just don't do it.
Well, it may have something to do with the fact that the elites, the people who are controlling this, are clever, but they're not actually very smart.
Well, they're banking on us being even less smarter than them. They're banking on us being stupid. But the problem is with all narcissists and all people that do these kind of things is that they overestimate themselves and they underestimate their opponents.
Yeah, I think one of the things that they're really scared of is they're actually really scared of the fact that we have the capability of living in relativities, and with relativities comes the ability to actually start, thinking beyond the moment, thinking beyond the next meal, and start looking at the bigger pictures. And when we start looking at the bigger pictures, then we start to realise, hang on a sec, we're being ripped off, and we've slaved away for centuries, under a under a system that has been controlled by the few. And once the penny drops, then the system itself, is under threat of being overthrown. They don't want that. They want to keep their control over people. Never before have we had such freedom, as we have had in these, in the last, 30, 50, 100 years.
A tremendous amount of freedom and flexibility and communication, and we've never had it any better. This is why I find it so bizarre that we're actually going in reverse.
What I find ironic is, in the early 70s, we gained supersonic flight. We could travel at faster than the speed of sound. 2.5 times as fast as the speed of sound. Passenger aircraft. And it's like, we've already lost that. And slowly we're losing so much of that which we've had. For what? Because it's not convenient. Because it's become too easy for the average everyday Joe to actually have a good life. And when the everyday Joe has a good life and has time to sit back and relax and start sort of considering, what they have and consider the issues of the day, and we might actually figure out where the pinch points are, where the problems are, and those pinch points and problems are those that generally vested in those that want to wield power.
Remember the promises of the space age? We would be living the life that the Jetsons were living. We went to the moon. They lost the technology for it. We could travel faster than the speed of light, and using the Concorde. They shut it down. They said because of an accident.
Speed of sound.
And I saw a documentary that they were actually claiming that it was not justifiable in terms of the cost to keep it going. But you'd want to think that while we're getting something new off the ground, that it's worth the investment to continue and to develop it and to continually improve it and to make it safer for the users. Of course, now we have technology. We don't even need people to be on the plane to test them out. They can just do it by remote control now. So it's not as if we don't have the ability to improve on these technologies.
Well, the interesting thing about the Concorde program was, they had a B series sort of already designed, which was nearly ready to enter production, which would have significantly increased the fuel efficiency of the Concorde, and significantly reduced the negative effects, which was the sonic boom. And as a consequence, increased the range, reduced the fuel payload that would have had to have been carried for a given distance, which would have made it much more viable.
Yeah.
And it's like, well,
Well, it's all about money, isn't it? At the end of the day, oil and fuel, petrol, oil distillates, finished oil, refined fuel products were becoming far too cheap and easy for us. So they're closing these refineries down all around the world. Marsden Point's not the only refinery that the oil companies have closed. I mean, they've closed refineries in Australia. They've closed refineries up through Europe. They've been closing refineries. There's no shortage of oil. There's no war causing this.
Yeah.
What's causing this problem? What's causing this problem we have is a shortage of refining capability.
Technically, we have. There is actually a reduction in the amount of oil that's been pumped out. Libya has pretty much just shut down all of its oil fields, and they were a significant oil producer, 600 million barrels a day.
They shut it down during after this price increase and all the rest of it started going on, and why they've done that's anyone's guess, but perhaps you're like, let's shut down our production, so let's get the price of oil up, right?
Once you dig...
I suspect Libya were feeling a little bit ripped off because the price of oil hadn't really moved as much as the price of refined fuel had, because at the moment oil's trading for about $118 a barrel, give or take. We're looking at $3, over $3 for 91 in New Zealand for, some refined products. 2008, the price of oil went to $139 a barrel, and there was a government inquiry when 91 went over $2 a litre. So there's a massive disparity between the price of a cost of barrel oil and the litre of 91 as opposed to 2008 and now. The only thing that can really explain that is that there's a lack of refined finished product available. So that's a refining crisis. And I suspect Libya probably was getting a bit pissed off and thinking, well, how come these oil companies are making money hand over fist and we're still only getting $118 a barrel? I mean, if I could get the price of oil up myself if I was losing out on all that coin.
They were probably getting bugger all in terms of the actual royalties from what was being taken out of the ground as well.
Exactly.
That probably hadn't increased. It was the oil companies that were creaming it. At the expense of the locals. And you've got to remember too that Libya is a state which is in absolute trauma because of what Hillary Clinton did, and in terms of getting rid of Gaddafi.
Yeah, well, apparently the Gaddafi, the whole dinero investment was a scam set up by Hillary Clinton and a bunch of her people. What I see playing out right now in terms of the fuel crisis from the Middle Eastern side is that they're really deterring. Right now there's a massive, unprecedented scale of non-investment and decoupling from the US dollar. So a lot of that is also involved in it as well. I mean, it's a it's a multi-level chess game of chess, but that's one of the issues around it as well, that they're de-dollarizing. So that is actually contributing to the increase of fuel prices for these countries that are reliant, not so much on the country that I'm in, Vietnam, because they already have a relationship with Russia, and you know what's going on there. So everything is fine here. We're not really getting affected. We're not going to have a food crisis. They've decided not to go along with it, which is, touch wood, Southeast Asia sounds like it's going to come out probably the victor in all of this in terms of stability, keeping the country stable, keeping the fuel prices down, keeping the inflation down, keeping the food supplies running around, and slowly weaning themselves off. So this is an issue for these Western cabal-related countries that are supporting these elites, and they're now feeling the effects of what happens when people walk away from the petrodollar.
I'd agree with that.
Yeah,
It's an attack on the US currency as well. I mean, make no bones about it, there is a war going on. We're in the thick of a war. We've been in a war for, the world's been at war for at least 2 years now.
Yes.
Other people, Daniel likes to trace it back to 2019. I think that the first real salvo was fired with the US election. But what do? You undermine the currency. You take out fuel. You take out food, fuel, and you've disabled your enemy, right?
Yeah, that's right. I guess I would say for myself here, from an Asian point of view, being here, I would say it started when Trump was first elected. That's when the war kind of started then, because it was really being felt in 2017 in China, because they started kicking foreigners out left, right, and center. And now, and right at the end of 2017 and 2018, what did they introduce? The social credit system. And the situation going on now with, Shanghai had 2 months of intense lockdown. So I always had this idea during the lockdowns that there were some things going on behind the scenes. And it seems to have been the case in Shanghai, that they were also going after problematic people that were not fitting into the Chinese plan of the future century. They call it the Chinese century. So there's a bit of, because we know that COVID-19 is a HOAX, so the algorithms don't pick us up. We know it's a HOAX, right? Saying it's just a cover story for doing all of this stuff, and to cover up the fact that we are in a world war. We're literally in a world war. But right now it's being played out on a resources level, on an energy level, on a financial level, and it's been the denazification of the Ukraine that's kicked off the physical level, the hot war level. And China and America are sort of in a proxy war with Taiwan in the middle, using Taiwan. So that could be possibly the next throes of the war. But the thing is, with the Chinese war, is actually I made a mistake last week. I said that they wanted the Russian war. In fact, there was a war with China they wanted first. And that was supposed to happen around 2014, 2015. Then Trump came in 2016 and threw the whole thing out of whack. So I'm probably going along with Levi on this one, saying that since the advent of Trump, and I'm not a Trumper, I actually kind of like the guy, but I'm impartial. I'm not a Republican. I'm a New Zealander, so we don't have Republicans or Democrats. But I'm definitely sort of center-right, with a little bit of godliness thrown in there as well, which most of us probably are center-right, with a bit of religious background or spirituality involved. So yeah, I'm willing to say that we are in a world war, and it's called World War Z, i.e. the movie, and we've been in it probably since 2016. And when it comes to being in a war against the actual elite by the citizens of the world, it's been since 2007, 2008. That's when it officially started.
Sovereigns of the world.
Yes, sovereigns.
Sovereigns of the world.
The living humans.
Citizens are employees of the state.
That's right.
They are slaves of the state.
The living humans of the world. All right. What do you say about that, Levi?
Oh, look, we can speculate and disagree on, when the war started, but, I think we're all pretty much on the same page that, there's a war raging.
Yeah,
And
that's right.
Marsden point is, in my estimation, as a casualty of that war. And the onus of that lays squarely on our politicians, the people that are in Parliament.
Yes.
The onus for the closure of Marsden Point is on them. You know, regardless of whether it was a privately owned shareholding or a publicly traded shareholders company, it is a strategic national asset. It's needed for our food production and transport. And, you know, as a very bare minimum, you know, if they wanted to do all this carbon nonsense, they should have sold the refined petrol offshore and got the carbon, charged those people carbon credits or whatever the heck they're trading, kept the diesel for our food production, you know.
Yeah.
There are other ones. That's why I say that, you know, the green agenda is just ardent nonsense, and it's just a very badly made cover for, you know, for another agenda that's at play here. The sooner that people who are awake to this start to really get serious about, you know, about what these people are doing, get as serious as they are, we really need to stand up, and we need to stand up in a big way.
Yeah, speaking of the onus is on them, let's transition that over. I'm just going to read this. And it's just like reading a fairy tale the entire time. You know, whenever I look at government policy now, it's just like reading a fairy tale. It's like reading Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. The Commission was satisfied. Its analysis, which I spelt wrong, its analysis shows the government could implement emissions reduction plans with sufficient headroom to still meet its emissions budgets, even in the face of negative shocks. Now, this is contrary to the fact that if we were refining it ourselves, we wouldn't have as many ships coming in. If we were refining the oil ourselves, we wouldn't have to increase carbons through the creation of biofuels. This is literally the opposite of reality. Don't you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that for them to try and hoodwink us and say, well, this is about sustainability. It's not about sustainability. You know, this is about this toxin called carbon dioxide. You know, which ironically is a gas that is essential for life. You know, sort of all plants consume carbon dioxide, you know, to grow, you know, and produce and feed us. You know, that carbon dioxide is an essential gas. You know, and you know, the more carbon dioxide there is in the atmosphere, the greener things get. You know, we know that, you know, it is common practice for large greenhouse operations to, you know, pump carbon dioxide, you know, into their greenhouses in order to increase the growth rate. You know, it's you know the absolute absurdity. You know, so they want to reduce carbon dioxide. They want to reduce the carbon footprint.
The imaginary carbon footprint.
This is the carbon footprint.
Yes, the imaginary one. Levi, we're gonna finish up here with you. I want your take on this, just as a closing statement.
Well, I was just going to say it's just another way they're trying to kill us. A low carbon atmosphere is an atmosphere where food won't grow properly, and more people are going to die from starvation.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Definitely, New Zealand is not as bad as what's happening in the US, but as well as, you know, they're down to they've used about 25% of their strategic oil reserves. They're getting down there pretty low. They've had hundreds of food processing plants destroyed just in the last 2 months. Literally hundreds, always under dubious scenarios. Late in the middle of the night, something happens, an explosion. Recently, a light airplane crashed into a food processing plant. But couple that together, For the USA, and if this continues and expands over to Australia and New Zealand, this is actually going into a very serious crisis situation in the Western countries. Asians are not going to have that much trouble with it, and I doubt that Africans are going to have so much trouble with it with their investment with China and Russia. But we Western countries, we are going to fall victim to our own ignorance. Levi?
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. I can't disagree with you there. You know, there's more to this than meets the eye.
Absolutely.
But I think we need to stay on mission. Now, our mission here is New Zealand's energy supply. That is Marsden Point. That means we need this refinery to be operating. We need it for food security. It's as simple as that. And, you know, people, don't listen to the garbage that comes out of the mouths of those snakes in that parliament. Because if they try to tell you we don't need this refinery, they are lying to you. It's as simple as that. They're lying to you. We need the diesel from this plant to run our food production and our food distribution network. That's all I'm concerned about is the food. I don't care if I have to, you know, go and brew some alcohol or something and make a fancy alcohol-powered car, or make a hydrogen-powered car, or, you know, if I have to put even, you know, vegetable seed oil in my old diesels to drive around on my personal, you know, in my personal life. All I care about is that we have food for our diesel for our food production and our food transportation. Because we are at this, you know, the world is at war, and fuel is a major issue in a time of war.
That's right. We are in a world at war. Levi, Daniel, thank you for joining me today. We'll see you next week on the State of the Nation with these fine young men. Good evening, sirs. Well, actually, no, it's good morning now. Good morning. And you have a great day ahead. Okay.
Good afternoon from New Zealand, mate.
Yes. Good afternoon, guys. Take care. There you have it, folks. Another energy report on the State of the Nation. My name is Jason Bainbridge, and we're going to see you next week here on State of the Nation.